agile development and failing fast. And so we talk a lot about even using sort of startup practices within a nonprofit. So even agile software development and doing sprint planning and releasing a minimum viable product so that you can get validation from donors or on the program side, whoever you're serving, and then begin to iterate on that. Everything about the agile software development process assumes that you're going to fail. In fact, most great companies now from the startup phase that are trying to create growth, create it through failure. They learn through failure, and then they iterate to get better. And I would argue that culture is almost entirely lost in most nonprofits. So, man, it's so good to hear you guys are doing that. And if I would say if there's anything in here that you guys can take away, or that our listeners can take away, it's that piece, is that embrace failure. Learn quickly. Failure is not failed. And so what we're going to do is we're going to iterate and get better. The other part there is, man, the second part really was just out of our playbook was, the Googles and the Facebooks and the HubSpots or the whoever of the world have created a world where people have beautiful, delightful brand experiences that are completely and totally personalized to them. And yet we're living in a world where nonprofits don't delight and surprise, and they don't create personalized experience. It's all one-to-many broadcast style 1980s approach, which is just the chasm's going wider and wider between the two. And so I think a lot of nonprofits, whether they like it or not, are facing these existential crises where their donors expect one thing because they're getting it from every other brand, and then they can't deliver. And so,
that's right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not repeating what you said, but my gosh, that's sort of exactly what we preach every day. And as soon as you can get it, it's game changing.
Yeah, well, I'll carry that drum with you virtuous guys. And I just want to say that I get that in the nonprofit space, it's hard to look at donors and board members and say, we spent $100 on something that we weren't sure was going to fail, but we thought it kind of would. I get that it's hard to look at donors and say that. So you do have to work on how you're going to present that. So that's a detriment. The benefit that we get in the nonprofit space is you really are trying to do something that changes the world. And so while people have these higher expectations, and you should absolutely drive to meet those expectations, there's a little bit of grace out there for knowing that you're a nonprofit. It doesn't mean that you can fall far short all the time. But if you fall a little bit short and you continue to improve, the market's going to be okay with that. But not with a wholesale miss.
Yeah. What's great too, I think, is that as turned into more of a conversation than a podcast at this point, but especially with younger donors, they appreciate transparency so much, and the way you actually demonstrate transparency is being transparent with your failures. Being transparent with everything you did right is not transparency. And so it's unbelievable when you say, man, we tried this and that was a train wreck, that you become so much more believable at that point because they know not everybody's perfect. So at the point where you're even communicating honestly with your donors, hey, we're giving this our best shot. At best, on a good day, we're working 80% of the time, sometimes less. And that's just reality. And I think especially younger donors resonate with that because they know it's true.
Yeah. And you know what? This is a different podcast, but there's a great social play in validating your social marketing through that kind of stuff. People really need to see that. And the bottom line is, for me, is I just don't know how to solve world-changing problems without creativity and innovation. And I don't think anybody's going to get there without it. People will appreciate that drive.
Yep. That's right. No, I love that. Okay. So let's say I'm a nonprofit leader out there, somebody listening to this podcast, and I think, man, I want that kind of creativity and innovation coming from my team. What are some tips that you can give somebody? I know this Innovation Lab has been a big deal for you guys, but what are other tips that you can give somebody trying to start a good creative team?
Yeah, well, certainly you need to hire or create the right kind of people, right? And a lot of this for me was just change management. And there's a million great tips on change management that I won't go through on this podcast, but you need to prep people with this vision that we really are going to tackle this, and the right kind of folks are going to be those creatives that can think about this in a new way. And then honestly, Gabe, I go back to really focus them in on exactly what it is, the problem you want to tackle. It can't be enough to say, we're going to solve water in the world. It has to be, we're going to do it this way and in this place and by this time. So really focus them. Make sure that you reward people for failing. And there's a great TED Talk, I think, on celebrating failure. And you really need to make that not the first time that you say we're going to have a fail-safe culture because you read a book and you don't reward the failures, you'll never get there with the existing team because they'll just see straight through it. And honestly, everybody's been told forever, I want you to innovate. I just don't want you to ever not succeed with your innovations. And so we already talked about that. And then just remember the Apple Netflix lessons, which is there really is no detail that's not worth sweating. You got to sweat it all.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I love that. And I think even just implementing, rewarding failure, some of those are reinforcing the culture because you walk into organizations and the team's been doing it the same old way for the last 20 years. And so you have to do some pretty great things in order to break some of those cultural norms.
You do. Yeah.
So let's do this because I don't want to keep you on here all day. You got the world to change out ahead of you. So we usually at the end of this thing do a bit of a lightning round and ask you just a couple quick questions to finish out our time together because I always think it's fun to see how people answer these. So first question is, what's the book that you've read this year, or I'll give you maybe the last 2 years, that's had the greatest impact on you?
Yeah, well, I'll give you two. I'll start with The Road to Character by David Brooks. Fantastic book, and I cannot recommend it enough to everybody. It's not a leader-focused book. It's for everybody. The Road to Character by David Brooks. And he talks about he really is. He really is. I appreciate his writing no matter where it is. But this is really a seminal book. This is a book that will change the way that you look at your life. And honestly, if you're a nonprofit, this is the kind of language that I think we need to be talking about as just your peer in the nonprofit world. These are the kind of things that our donors should be talking about, the kind of things our employees should be pointing at. So I actually got it in here at Cook. Of course, we don't publish that book. So I got it in, and I'm having my entire team read it on their own. I think it's that important. And the second is I just enjoy a little bit more closer to faith-based nonprofit work. I enjoy basically anything that John Ortberg has written. His last book, which actually we don't publish at all. I should probably have thought of some books we do. But honestly, we're trying to, Gabe, you'll appreciate this. To a publisher, every solution is a book, right? So I keep telling my team, don't start with the book. Start with the message, the thing that's on people's hearts that they think people need to hear that will change the world. And if we get to book, I'm fine. But take me through every conceivable possible vehicle to communicate that before we get the book. So that's my free aside. That's the bonus item for this podcast, right? You always give one bonus item.
Right.
So his last book is I Would Like You More If You Were More Like Me by John Ortberg. I would like you more if you were more like me. Good read.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and John Ortberg is great. The guy's so readable, so entertaining, so insightful. So that's a good choice.
Indeed.
So next one, podcasts. You got any podcasts you listen to? If podcasts aren't your thing, you can always go to some cool streaming TV show or something you're listening to. But do you have any podcasts you really like?
Well, other than the Virtuous podcast, which clearly I'm a huge fan of now.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
I like that one very much. I have a couple podcasts that I listen to, but not regularly enough to recommend them to you or anybody who's listening to this, which is probably at this point just my mother and my wife and my 2 daughters. So yes, take a pass on that one.
That's great. And then kind of personal habits. You got a lot going on. You got got a family, you have military responsibilities, you're running publishing